Alabama won the Iron Bowl yesterday, 24-22. I have probably one of the more surreal experiences that I will ever remember for a big game when it comes to this game. So I have since gone back and watched the entire game. But my experience yesterday as this game's going on is I'm driving through a driving snowstorm. Even by northern standards, Michigan got hit pretty hard yesterday. So I, from rural Georgia, am trying to trek back from Ann Arbor to the Detroit airport. And it is white knuckle, it is 10-2 time, and it's 25 miles an hour on I-94, which was painfully undertreated, by the way. That's a DOT problem. But a JDP problem was, I am getting updates from the Iron Bowl. I gave you the initial of my middle name there, by the way. I'm getting updates from the Iron Bowl. And here's what happened. I had to really choose where I was going to divide my attention. When I saw Bama go down, and they turn the ball over, and it's under 2 minutes to go, and the timeout situation is not looking good, and quite frankly, they're not looking like they can score if they get another shot anyway, I assumed the game was over. And so I choose to focus all my attention on the last 15 or 20 miles of my trip to the airport. And then I get to the rental car terminal. And my phone blows up. My phone had blown up. I just saw the messages. Alabama's won the game. They won the game in overtime, quadruple overtime, however we're phrasing overtime now, which is a complete disaster. And I think to myself, okay, I know these people aren't lying to me, and I know the scoreboard says what it says, but I'm trying to guess before I go and look for myself, how would they have possibly pulled this off? And sure enough, it took Tank Bigsby going out of bounds. It took a 90-plus yard drive. It took Ja'Cory Brooks. Hey, we've been calling for those freshman receivers for a while. It took Ja'Cory Brooks making a big play. But what a shocker. I mean, given the circumstances, what a shocker. And consider this now. Consider Alabama was 8 of 22 on third down. Consider they had 11 penalties for 129 yards, and they still ended up winning this thing. And I had a lot of you text me and say, boy, I guess you were wrong on your pick. You really thought Bama was going to cover in this game. Yeah, the model, and I disagreed last week. The model won. I fought the model, and the model won. However, when I went back and watched it, because I thought we had just whiffed. That's what I thought. I went back and watched it. I didn't really feel all that bad about what my thinking was behind the pick. The point being, if you tell me Robinson's going out and you tell me Jamison Williams going out in the first half, no, I'm not picking Alabama to come anywhere close to covering. And in years past, that hasn't been the case. This Bama team last year, you take Jalen Waddle off of it, they keep right on going. You can't even tell they lost a first-round talent. You can't do that to this year's team. You cannot take Jamison Williams off that field, or this offense grinds to a halt. That is their playmaking star wide receiver. He was gone. Targeting, he's gone. And so having said that, Bama pulls out the win. Now, what's most interesting to me is watching Nick Saban's reaction and juxtaposing it to the public and just the Alabama fan in general, their reaction. The Bama fan's aggravated that the game's that close, and I get it. There's a standard there. But Nick Saban is just like thrilled. And in the postgame press conference, he was lauding that team. He said they fought like I've never seen that team fight all year. I think what's happened there is there are a lot of folks who are viewing Bama through the prism of just what Bama normally is. And if you're viewing them through that prism, these results aren't good enough. I know that. Saban, I don't think, is viewing them through that prism. I think Nick Saban's viewing that team through the prism of I know exactly what they are and what they aren't this year. What they aren't is an elite team. What they are not is my usual Alabama team. But what they were yesterday was a team that found a way, I mean, against pretty insurmountable odds, as it turned out, to win the Iron Bowl. That's no small deal. You know, you look at some of these programs, when they have a down year, Penn State's having a down year this year. They're 7-5. Bama is about to go to the SEC championship game 11-1. I think we can all agree this is a down year for them. So, yeah, it's not the worst thing in the world to be going into your rival's backyard, which has been a house of horrors for them, and winning. Now, Bama's going to Atlanta this Saturday. I have no idea how you would put together a confident argument for them being superior to Georgia at this point, because they're not. I am struggling to put together our preview for Tuesday's show, because what I try to do for the underdog is I try and build the case of what would have to happen for the upset. Now, point spread wise, this would not be a monumental upset. It's 6.5 is the number right now, 6 or 6.5, depending on where you look. But if you've watched Georgia all year and you've watched Bama all year, you understand this is a horrific matchup for Alabama. They cannot run the ball right now, Alabama, with any consistency. Brian Robinson, I would not expect him to be available Saturday. He has a lower extremity injury, translation hamstring. I wouldn't expect him to be able to go. And they're already very, very thin at that position to begin with. Look, crazier things have happened. It is tough. It's tough to paint a picture. But we will be there because crazier things have happened. So Alabama wins 24-22. What about Bedlam? Oklahoma State over Oklahoma 37-33. How different? Here's what I want to ask you. Think about this. How different would today look if Oklahoma won this game? If OU wins, then that means they're going to the Big 12 championship game, which means Lincoln Riley has another game to coach. Are we hearing the announcement today about USC? I just wonder. Maybe we would, maybe we wouldn't, or maybe they would have just delayed it a week. I don't know. That's what we can't know. What we do know here is Oklahoma State lost the turnover battle. They were outgained by 87 yards. They went 3 of 11 on third down, and they won. Here's why I'm pointing that out. Remember this team earlier in the year? Look at that cowboy hat. Remember this team earlier in the year when they were just barely scooting by Tulsa and some directional school from Missouri? You remember when they were just barely getting by and you looked at them every week and you didn't really care? Yeah, Missouri State. You didn't really care that they were winning because you thought to yourself, this team is so inferior. They are such a poser as an undefeated Power 5 that they'll be exposed. I mean, you thought, like I did, that Oklahoma State probably had a few losses on their schedule, just somewhere down the road. I mean, if it's not at Iowa State, it'll be West Virginia, it'll be TCU, it'll be Texas Tech. Well, they did lose one game, and that was it. That was the end of the losing. Now, here's why I mentioned those stats from yesterday. It's very important for what is an inevitable, impending college football playoff argument. If Oklahoma State wins this Saturday, and they are 12-1 Big 12 champions, the fact that they could go 3 of 11 on third down against OU and lose the turnover battle and get outgained by 87 yards and still win, it means they've developed the ability to lose their fastball, need the changeup, need the curve, and still win. Those teams that are inferior, they cannot win unless they have their fastball. That is a sign that Oklahoma State has improved. And I think they've improved significantly this year. This is a developmental sport. That's what you're supposed to do. The best teams are supposed to get better. And that's exactly what I'm saying. Oklahoma State is one of the best teams. And one of the reasons I think that is because they've gotten a lot better. They, being Oklahoma State, they open as a 6.5-point favorite against Baylor. That number's already come down to 5.5. More on that game a little bit later. LSU beat Texas A&M yesterday, 27-24. I've got a padlock stat. This is going to be short and sweet. It is 54. Those were every single yard that Texas A&M got on the ground rushing. That's good for 1.9 yards per carry. This was the facet of the game that I was uncertain about, and they could not control the line of scrimmage to the degree they needed to, and as a result, they get beat by LSU. These teams were combined 8 of 31 on third down, so it was not exactly an offensive clinic, but LSU did enough to win here. Here are two things that stood out to me, because we're looking kind of towards the future, and that's the lens with which you choose to look at these games through. A&M ended up being a different team on the road this year, and that's been a problem at times for Jimbo Fisher there. In fact, it's been a problem his whole time there, and it cropped up again this year. But the second thing is LSU, when they pulled the trigger on Ed Orgeron, there were a lot of folks who thought this team's going completely in the tank. That's not what happened. They ended up playing their best football because it was like pulling a plug and all this pressure was built up and it just exhales. The program collectively exhaled, and then they just went and they played, had fun, I guess you could say. And they won some games. They almost beat Bama. They played their best football. And I wonder if that's not something you may see in the future. Now, this was a pretty unique circumstance, I'll grant you that. But it also allowed Ed Orgeron to go out of town on a high note. And if he handles himself the right way, I think you know as well as I do, right now, you could still have a sour taste in your mouth about Ed Orgeron. 10 years from now, they're not going to remember how it ended. Ed Orgeron, when he comes to town, will be the guy who took us to the highest of highs in 2019. And that's it. That's all. That's how history remembers championship coaches, unless they royally screw it up. And Ed Orgeron screwed it up enough to get fired. I don't think he screwed up his legacy. That is pending nothing off the field transpiring, that may be under investigation right now. which we cannot have any guided information on. So Ed Orgeron goes out on a high note. This was a bad ending to a season for Texas A&M. Texas A&M, you can't make sense of the SEC this year. A&M ends up losing 4 games. One of them is not Alabama. Make sense of that, because I can't. The last game I wanted to touch on very briefly, and by the way, I appreciate you guys who are tuned in. I got a message for you in a second. Michigan State beat Penn State 30-27 yesterday. I don't want you to overlook this game. It was probably off your radar because there wasn't a trip to a conference championship on the line, wasn't playoff ramification on the line. But don't overlook this. Remember, Mel Tucker got that big contract extension, and then they got skull-drugged by Ohio State. And a lot of people said, oh man, they paid him too early. They inked that contract too early. Well, okay, if you want to think that, you can think that. I just want to tell you, what they did yesterday is not easy. For that matter, what Oregon did yesterday against Oregon State is not easy. When you get pasted, and in the process, you lose your postseason aspirations as they were presently defined, the playoff, in other words, and you get right back off the deck the following week, that shows you got some resiliency, you got some pride about yourself, but you also have a culture that you are bathed in as being in that program that's about more than external stuff. And that's Mel Tucker. He preaches it all the time, but a lot of guys preach it. Are you about it? Well, you get beat 56-7, and you get back up off the deck, and you win at home. 30-27 yesterday, that's a big deal. Don't forget that. It may not matter to you this year. You may not care about the difference between 10-2 or 9-3. It's just a good year for Michigan State, really good year actually. But down the road, they're going to be in more consequential games, postseason games, and you may be thinking to yourself, boy, I can't choose either way on this matchup. What's an intangible? Where is an unforeseen, unquantifiable edge? That kind of stuff matters. I can't give you a proper numerical value on it. I'm just telling you it matters. It mattered yesterday. So Penn State, on the other side of this coin, they started 5-0. Boy, that's a long time ago. They started 5-0. They finished 7-5. How about this? It's a little Nebraska theme. Penn State's losses: 3 points, 2 points, 9 points, 4 points, 3 points. Penn State lost 5 games by a combined 21 points. At least that's what Stats and Info tells me. How do we judge where Penn State is headed? I got mixed feelings on it. I mean, the margins and the recommittal to James Franklin, it tells me they're not far off. Got a really good quarterback coming in, a really good class coming in. Maybe that's the spark. I mean, this isn't a program I don't feel that has lost its way or its way. There is a spark. There's that oomph that's needed. And it wasn't quarterback yesterday. I mean, Clifford played well yesterday. They could not run the ball. There's a level of execution and physicality on the line of scrimmage offensively they've got to get back. Okay, so that's stuff that you work on for the upcoming year. But don't overlook that deal with Michigan State. To me, that's a very big deal.